Good morning, lovely people. Today, I want to talk about something that is out of the norm, but somehow always seems to work. You have to assume the avoidant will always come back running to you, aka be delusional. Operating under the assumption that your avoidant partner will inevitably return changes everything about how you navigate the aftermath of their withdrawal or departure. This isn't wishful thinking or romantic fantasy. It's strategic psychological preparation based on predictable avoidant behavior patterns. They almost always come back. And understanding this certainty allows you to maintain your power and make decisions from a position of strength rather than desperation. The psychological inevitability of their return. Avoidant individuals are psychologically wired to return to their secure bases when external pressures or internal discomfort become overwhelming. You represent their emotional safe haven, even if they can't consciously acknowledge this reality. Their attachment system, despite their conscious resistance to intimacy, compels them to seek reconnection when their independent facade becomes unsustainable. The return isn't about love, growth, or genuine desire for partnership. It's about psychological survival. When avoidants face stress, loneliness, or the reality that replacing your emotional availability is impossible, their attachment system activates and drives them back to the familiar comfort you provided. This process is as predictable as any other psychological response pattern. Their need for your specific type of emotional regulation makes your replacement nearly impossible. Other people expect reciprocity, demand emotional availability, or require the kind of vulnerable connection that triggers their avoidant defenses. You offered a rare combination of emotional support without overwhelming demands, making you irreplaceable in their psychological ecosystem. Understanding this inevitability means you can stop torturing yourself with questions about whether they'll return and start preparing for how you'll respond when they do. The question isn't if, it's when, and more importantly, whether you'll be ready to protect yourself from their predictable manipulation tactics. I refuse to sugarcoat this reality. Their return is almost guaranteed, but it has nothing to do with recognizing your worth and everything to do with their inability to function without the emotional services you provided. Don't mistake their psychological neediness for romantic epiphany. Why distance makes you more attractive to them. The psychological principle of scarcity makes your absence more powerful than your presence ever was in triggering their attachment system. When you are consistently available, they could take your emotional support for granted while maintaining their distance. Your absence creates uncertainty that activates their dormant fear of abandonment and makes them question their assumption that you'll always be available. Distance also allows them to idealize the relationship while forgetting the aspects that made them withdraw. They remember your positive qualities, the emotional comfort you provided, and the security they felt, while their memory minimizes the intimacy demands that triggered their avoidance. This selective memory makes returning to you feel appealing rather than threatening. Your unavailability also threatens their sense of control over the relationship dynamic. Avoidants feel secure when they can predict and manage others' emotional investment in them. When you become genuinely unavailable, they lose this control and begin to panic about permanently losing their emotional anchor. This panic often motivates their return more powerfully than any conscious recognition of your value. The competitive aspect of human psychology also kicks in when they realize you might be moving on or investing your emotional energy elsewhere. The possibility that someone else might claim what they took for granted triggers possessive instincts that override their conscious preference for emotional distance. Distance transforms you from a source of pressure into a source of comfort in their memory. Without the daily reality of your emotional needs and relationship expectations, they can fantasize about reconnecting without having to confront the intimacy demands that originally drove them away. The patterns that predict their return. Certain life circumstances almost guarantee an avoidance return. Recognizing these patterns helps you prepare rather than being caught off guard by their sudden reappearance. Major life transitions, periods of stress, relationship failures with others, or significant losses typically trigger their need for familiar emotional support and drive them back to you. Holiday seasons, anniversaries, or significant dates often prompt their return because these times activate their attachment system and make them crave connection they can't access elsewhere. Their emotional walls may protect them during normal circumstances, but special occasions break through their defenses and make them seek the comfort you provided. Career setbacks, health issues, family problems, or other major stresses overwhelm their capacity for emotional self-regulation and drive them to seek the calming presence you offered. During these vulnerable moments, their need for emotional support overrides their fear of intimacy and compels them to reach out. Failed attempts to replace you with other partners often prompt their return with renewed appreciation for what you offered. Other people's demands for reciprocity, emotional availability, or genuine commitment highlight how accommodating you were to their limitations. These failed replacements make them realize how rare your unconditional emotional availability actually was. I'm telling you this directly. Watch for these patterns and prepare your response in advance. Don't let their predictable return catch you emotionally unprepared or make you forget why the relationship didn't work originally. Their return is about their needs, not their growth. How to maintain your power during their absence. The key to maintaining power during their absence is genuinely investing in your own life rather than waiting in suspended animation for their return. This means pursuing your interests, developing other relationships, focusing on personal growth, and creating a fulfilling existence that doesn't depend on their eventual reappearance. Resist the temptation to remain emotionally available in case they decide to return. Don't keep your schedule open, your heart ready, or your life on hold for someone who chose to leave. Your emotional availability should be earned through consistent behavior, not preserved for someone who abandoned it when it was freely given. Develop and maintain strict boundaries about what you will and won't accept if they return. Decide in advance what evidence of change you would require, what behaviors you won't tolerate, and what your non-negotiable standards are for any potential reconciliation. Having these boundaries established prevents you from being manipulated by their temporary charm offensive. Continue dating, exploring other connections, and remaining open to relationships with people who can actually meet your emotional needs consistently. Don't close yourself off from genuine opportunities because you're expecting someone incapable of genuine partnership to eventually return and suddenly become capable. Use their absence as an opportunity to heal from the relationship trauma. Understand your own patterns and develop the emotional strength necessary to handle their inevitable return from a position of power rather than neediness. This healing work is for you, not in preparation for them. Let me be crystal clear about this. You owe them nothing during their absence. No loyalty, no emotional availability, no consideration for their feelings about your choices. They forfeited any claim to these considerations when they chose to leave. The manipulation tactics they use upon return. When avoidants return, they typically employ sophisticated manipulation tactics designed to minimize their accountability while maximizing your emotional investment. They may present their return as evidence of personal growth, claim they've realized what they lost, or promise that things will be different this time without providing concrete evidence of change. Love bombing is a common return strategy where they shower you with attention, affection, and promises to make up for their previous emotional unavailability. This intense focus feels like the emotional presence you always wanted, making it easy to believe they've genuinely changed. However, this behavior is typically temporary and designed to secure your recommitment rather than representing sustainable change. They often minimize the impact of their departure, reframe their leaving as necessary space rather than abandonment, or suggest that the time apart was beneficial for both of you. This rewriting of history serves to reduce their accountability while making their return seem reasonable rather than manipulative. Future-focused promises become their primary currency, offering commitments about how they'll behave differently, communicate better, or be more emotionally available. These promises feel compelling because they address your previous concerns, but they're typically made without the foundation of actual personal growth work that would make them sustainable. They may also use strategic vulnerability, sharing carefully selected emotions or experiences that make them seem more open and available than they were previously. This controlled emotional sharing feels like progress while actually representing calculated manipulation designed to trigger your caretaking instincts. I've seen this pattern countless times, and I'm telling you without hesitation, their return tactics are manipulation, not genuine change. Real growth takes time, effort, and professional support, not convenient timing aligned with their emotional needs. Why you should assume they haven't yet changed. The default assumption should be that their return represents their psychological neediness rather than genuine personal growth or increased emotional capacity. Real change in avoidant attachment patterns requires extensive self-reflection, often professional help, and sustained effort over considerable time periods. Spontaneous emotional availability triggered by their discomfort with your absence isn't genuine growth. Their return timing typically coincides with their own emotional needs rather than evidence of personal development work. If they're returning because they miss you, feel lonely, or realize they can't replace what you provided, these are selfish motivations that don't indicate increased capacity for reciprocal partnership. Genuine change would be evidenced by accountability for their previous behavior, concrete steps they've taken to address their attachment patterns, demonstrated ability to maintain emotional availability over time without external pressure. Without these elements, their return represents the same person with the same limitations, seeking the same one-sided emotional arrangement. The burden of proof should be entirely on them to demonstrate that they've developed the emotional capacity necessary for healthy partnership. Your default assumption should be that nothing has changed until they provide compelling evidence otherwise through consistent behavior over extended time periods. Their promises about being different this time are meaningless without evidence of the inner work necessary to support different behavior. Words are easy. Sustainable emotional availability requires fundamental changes in their relationship with vulnerability and intimacy that don't happen simply through missing someone. The strategic advantage of expecting their return gives you enormous strategic advantage because it prevents their reappearance from catching you emotionally off guard or triggering desperate hope for reconciliation. When you know they're coming back, you can prepare your response and maintain emotional equilibrium instead of being overwhelmed by surprise and hope. This expectation allows you to continue building your life without the constant wondering and emotional suspension that comes from uncertainty about their intentions. You can invest fully in your own growth, other relationships, and personal goals without the distraction of hoping for their return or fearing it won't happen. Knowing they'll return also helps you recognize their reappearance for what it is: predictable psychological neediness rather than romantic revelation. This clarity protects you from being manipulated by their temporary emotional availability or convinced that their return represents genuine change without evidence. The strategic advantage extends to being able to set conditions for any potential reconciliation from a position of strength rather than gratitude. When you expect their return, you're not grateful they came back. You're evaluating whether their return offers anything worth your consideration. This expectation also allows you to observe their return tactics objectively rather than emotionally. You can recognize love bombing, future promising, and other manipulation strategies because you're prepared for them rather than being swept up in the temporary emotional intensity they create. I cannot stress this enough. Expecting their return is your psychological armor against being manipulated by their predictable neediness disguised as romantic epiphany. How to respond when they inevitably return. Your response to their return should be measured, skeptical, and focused on evidence rather than promises. Don't allow their emotional intensity or declarations of change to override your rational evaluation of whether they've actually developed the capacity for healthy partnership. Their return is an opportunity to assess their growth, not an automatic reason for reconciliation. Require concrete evidence of personal growth work such as therapy, self-help efforts, or specific steps they've taken to address their attachment patterns. Promises about future behavior are insufficient. You need evidence of current emotional capacity and commitment to continued growth. Without this evidence, their return is just emotional manipulation. Maintain your own emotional independence and continue investing in your life regardless of their return. Don't immediately reorganize your priorities, cancel other plans, or become emotionally available just because they've decided they want you back. Their timing doesn't obligate your immediate emotional investment. Set clear conditions for any potential reconciliation and stick to them regardless of their emotional appeals or manipulation tactics. These conditions should address the fundamental issues that caused the relationship problems originally, not just their temporary promises about being different. Take your time evaluating their return rather than making immediate decisions based on their emotional intensity or your own hope for reconciliation. Genuine change is demonstrated through consistent behavior over time, not through dramatic returns and temporary emotional availability. Here's my non-negotiable stance. Their return earns them consideration, not commitment. They left once, and they'll leave again unless they've done the fundamental work necessary to address their attachment patterns. Don't bet your emotional well-being on someone who's already proven they'll abandon you when intimacy becomes uncomfortable. The reality about their capacity for change. The harsh reality is that most avoidants who return haven't fundamentally changed their emotional capacity or relationship patterns. They've simply reached a point where their discomfort with your absence exceeds their discomfort with intimacy temporarily. This temporary shift in comfort levels doesn't represent lasting personal growth or increased emotional availability. Real change in avoidant attachment patterns requires acknowledging their emotional limitations, committing to extensive personal growth work, developing entirely new relationship skills over considerable time periods. Most avoidants aren't willing to do this work because it requires the vulnerability and sustained emotional effort they've spent their lives avoiding. Their return often represents their attempt to restore the previous relationship dynamic, where they received emotional support without reciprocating, rather than their readiness to create genuine partnership. They want to return to the comfort you provided without having to address the issues that caused the relationship problems originally. The psychological factors that drove their initial avoidance, fear of vulnerability, discomfort with intimacy, need for emotional control, don't disappear simply because they missed you or realized they couldn't replace what you offered. These deep-rooted patterns require professional intervention and sustained personal commitment to change. Accept that their return likely represents their neediness rather than their growth, and protect yourself accordingly. Hope for change if you want, but don't base your decisions on potential that may never materialize. Base your choices on their demonstrated capacity for emotional availability and genuine partnership, which their return alone doesn't prove they possess.